There are three main components in human circulatory system: the heart, blood vessels that have three types, which are artery, vein, and the smallest in diameter, blood capillary. And blood is the tissue that functions as the transportation medium will be flow in heart and blood vessels. The heart is a hollow organ which is muscular. Hollow means they have a empty space within the organ, and this organ able to beat at the early stage of the embryo development, and it only stop beating when the human is dead. Even though the organ is located at the center of the thorax, but if we observe from the posterior view of the thoracic cavity, the organ heart is positioned diagonally, or we say the two-thirds of it is slanted left to the body's midline. The heart is protected by a covering called as pericardium, and the heart wall consists of epicardium, myocardium, which compose of the cardiac muscle of the heart, and also endocardium. These three layers of tissue will make up the wall of heart. The heart is a hollow organ because if we observe the internal structure of the heart, there are four chambers of heart, which are the smaller chambers called as atrium, and the larger chambers called as ventricles. The right atrium and the left atrium, they are the two chambers that transport the oxygenated blood. That means the blood with the lower partial pressure of oxygen. And the left atrium and left ventricles, they are the two chambers that transport oxygenated blood, which means the blood with higher partial pressure of oxygen. And the two atria are the chambers that going to pump the blood into the ventricles, which do not involve long distance. This is why the thickness of the atrial wall is not as thick as the ventricular wall, because they do not need to generate high blood pressure to pump the blood. However, if we compare the thickness of the left ventricular wall with the right ventricular wall, the left ventricular wall have 3 times thicker than the right ventricular wall. This is because the function of the left ventricle is going to pump the oxygenated blood to the whole body. This is why they need to generate high blood pressure to ensure the blood can be transported to the whole body system. The right atrium and the left atrium are separated by a structure called as interatrial septum, which is going to prevent the mixture of blood between these two chambers. And at the same time, the right ventricle and left ventricle are separated by interventricular septum, which is a partition that separates the left ventricles from the right. The right side of the heart, which include the right atrium and the right ventricles, they are transporting the deoxygenated blood, which means the blood with low partial pressure of oxygen. However, the left side of the heart, which include the left atrium and the left ventricles, they are going to transport the oxygenated blood, which is the blood with higher partial pressure of oxygen. If there is the deformities atau kecacatan found at the septum between the atria or between the ventricles, the mixture of blood can happen, which can decrease the efficiency of gaseous exchange at the lungs or other body tissues. The atrioventricular valve or AV valve are found between the atria and the ventricles. The right AV valve is called as tricuspid valve, and the left AV valve is called as bicuspid valve because of the difference in structure. But both have the same function, which is prevent the blood from flowing back to the atria, because they need to ensure the one-way direction of blood flow from atrium into the ventricles. And the blood will be pumped from the ventricles into the arteries of both right and left side of the heart. And now the backflow of the blood from flowing back into the ventricles are prevented by another group of valve, which is the valve found in the arteries. On the right side, we have the pulmonary semilunar valve, and on the left side, we have the aortic semilunar valve. The names imply the location of the semilunar valve. Pulmonary because they are located at the pulmonary artery, and aortic because the valve is located in the aorta. And both have the similar function, which is prevent the backflow of blood into the ventricles. Among the four valves of one heart, only the atrioventricular valve, they are held by caudate in position, which is the heartstring of the heart. It can be observed in this GIF or in the picture shown here. So at the right hand side, we have the tricuspid valve, and the left side, we have the bicuspid valve, or another name of the bicuspid valve, which is the mitral valve. The contraction and relaxation of cardiac muscles able to change the blood pressure in the chambers, which are atria and the ventricles. The changes in the blood pressure found in the chambers able to open or close the valve. When the valve opens, they allow the blood flow from one location to another location. But when the valve closes, they prevent the backflow of blood. The gaseous exchange will occur at the capillary bed with the body cells. It can happen at the whole body, which include the upper part of the body and the lower part of the body. Now the blood will become deoxygenated blood, which means they have the lower partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. The deoxygenated blood will be collected from the whole body and sent to the heart via superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. The blood will reach at the right atrium of the heart and pump into the right ventricles and pump into the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery is the only artery in human body that carry deoxygenated blood, and they will send the blood to the right and the left lungs for gaseous exchange occurs at the alveoli, and the blood will become oxygenated blood, which means they have higher partial pressure of oxygen. The blood will be transported back to the heart via pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein is the only vein in human body that carry oxygenated blood, and the oxygenated blood will be transported into left atrium and pumped into left ventricles, and left ventricles will pump the blood into the largest blood vessels in human body, which is aorta, and aorta will send the blood to the other tissues of the body. The mammalian circulation, which include the human circulation, consists of two circuits. First is pulmonary circulation, which include the blood transported from heart to the lungs and transported back to the heart, which is from the number 1 until number 5. And the second circuit is systemic circulation, which means is the blood flow from the heart to other body tissues or other body system, and the blood will be sent from the other body tissues back to the heart, which is the systemic circulation, and is numbered from number 6 until 11 according to this diagram. One heartbeat consists of one complete sequence of contraction, which means the heart pumps the blood, and followed by relaxation, which means the heart is filled with the blood. So for each contraction followed by one relaxation, it becomes one heartbeat. For the duration when the cardiac muscle undergoes contraction is called as systole. However, when the cardiac muscle undergoes relaxation, it's called as diastole. So for a normal human, when they are at the resting state, the normal heartbeat should be 75 per minute. Vertebrate heart, include human heart, is myogenic, means the cardiac muscle of human has the capability to contract rhythmically and independently from nervous system, which means the contraction of cardiac muscle is not stimulated by the impulse generated by brain. This is due to the pacemaker located in the wall of heart. They able to generate the impulse to stimulate the contraction of cardiac muscle its own. The myogeny of cardiac muscles is initiated by the impulse generated at the sinoatrial node, or which is called as pacemaker. Once the impulse is generated here, it can be transmitted to the whole heart through other components, which is atrioventricular node, also called as AV node, the bundle of His, which is going to branch into the left bundle branches and the right bundle branches. And the two bundle branches will be channeled into the Purkinje fibers, which is found throughout the chambers of ventricles. These 5 components will make up the impulse transmission system in heart. There's a group of specialized cells that located at the wall of right atrium, which is near the opening of superior vena cava, called as sinoatrial node or pacemaker. The SA node will generate impulse to initiate heartbeat. Maksudnya, impuls yang dihasilkan di SA node adalah impuls yang memulakan heartbeat. Dengan itu, nama dia dipanggil sebagai pacemaker sebab kelajuan heartbeat sebenarnya ditentukan oleh kelajuan SA node menghasilkan impuls. The impulse generated from SA node will form a wave of excitation. Maksudnya, dia akan membentuk satu gelombang impuls yang merebak ke kedua-dua atrium. This able to cause the both atria contract at the same time, or atrial systole occurs. When atrial systole occurs, it opens the atrioventricular valve and pumps the blood into the ventricles. While both right and left atria still undergo contraction, the impulse reaches at the atrioventricular valve, or AV node, which is located in the wall between the right and the left atria. Impulse adalah sejenis electrical signal, maka kelajuan dia merebak sangat cepat. So semasa atria masih mengalami contraction, impulse ini telah sampai ke another group of specialized cells, which is AV node. Tetapi bila impulse sampai di sini, ia akan ditangguh selama 0.1 second, or we say the impulse will be delayed for about 0.1 second before it pass to the next components of the impulse transmission system. Kenapa dia nak menangguh transmission of the impulse? Because they want to make sure both atria can contract completely to empty the blood into the ventricles. After the delay of 0.1 second at the AV node, now the impulse is transmitted to the next component, which is bundle of His. The bundle of His will be divided into two bundle branches, which is right bundle branches and the left bundle branches. The function of the bundle of His and is bundle branches is to transmit the impulse to the heart apex. And the impulse will be transmitted to the next component, which is Purkinje fibers. Purkinje fibers are the nerve that spread throughout the wall of ventricles. So, when the impulse are transmitted by Purkinje fibers throughout the ventricles, it able to contract both ventricles from the heart apex upwards. So tujuan dia mengecut daripada bawah jantung ke arah atas sebenarnya untuk pump the blood into the arteries. So the blood will be pumped from the left ventricle into aorta, and the right ventricle will pump the blood into the pulmonary arteries. So the heartbeats can be occur repeatedly but with limit. Initiated by the signal produced at the SA node, which able to produce a wave of contraction to both atria. And the impulse will be delayed at the AV node for 0.1 second to make sure the blood will be empty fully into the ventricles. And AV node will transmit the impulse to the bundle of His and its bundle branches towards the heart apex. And finally, the impulse will be transmitted throughout the chambers of ventricles through Purkinje fibers. The purpose of the impulse transmitted throughout the ventricles is to make sure the contraction of ventricles can begin from the apex of heart upwards and force the blood into the aorta and pulmonary artery. The impulse generated by the impulse transmission system can be recorded by a machine and presented as electrocardiogram, which is called as ECG or EKG. By analyzing the different segments of the ECG, we can detect the heart diseases.